Record of Rinzai 11b. Venerable ones, there is no place of rest in the three worlds. It is like a house on fire. This is not a place for you to stay long. The murderous demon of impermanence strikes in a single instant, without choosing between high and low, old and young. Do you wish to be not different from the Buddhas and patriarchs? Then just do not look for anything outside. The pure light of your heart at this instant is the Dharmakaya Buddha in your own house. The non-differentiating light of your heart at this instant is the Sambhogakaya Buddha in your own house. The non-discriminating light of your own heart at this instant is the Nirmanakaya Buddha in your own house. This trinity of the Buddha's body is none other than he here before your eyes, listening to my expounding of the Dharma. You can come to seeing this only by not running and searching outside. So this is the first part of a sermon by Master Rinzai, and here we have some more of the Buddhist teachings or Buddhist doctrine. We have the three worlds, we have the demon of impermanence, as it's called, and we also have what's called the three bodies of the Buddha. And so we'll just take a look at those first. Venerable ones, there is no place of rest in the three worlds. It is like a house on fire. This is not a place for you to stay long. Well, those three worlds we've had before. These are the three worlds of desire, form and no form. And they're another formulation of samsara. That word samsara, Sanskrit term, which means just an aimless wandering about through a succession of states. And here this takes us back to the formulation of samsara that we see on the Wheel of Life, these six realms. Heavenly realms, fighting demons, animals, hell realms, hungry ghosts, and the human realms. And what the Buddha tells us is that only from the human realm is liberation possible. And of course, whereas in the West the view of the human state is as something weak and fallible, we say things like is human, etc. Actually in the East, humanhood or humanity is something towards which we are aspiring. In other words, we're not there yet, because those six realms, of course, we can usefully see from a training point of view, we can usefully see as a psychological map, that these are six states of consciousness into which we are reborn, and that, if you like, we can put all the states of consciousness that we experience in any human life can be mapped on that wheel of life. And it's a useful exercise to actually try doing that, to draw your own wheel of life, that pie chart with sort of six slices in it, and you put the six realms on. You can look those up and just identify what those six realms are. The heavenly realm, which is the realm of power and bliss and fulfillment, the fighting demons, the animal realm, which is the realm of no redress. Also, it's the realm of ignorance as well, because animals lack the discriminating power of wisdom. There's the hell realms, which are the various levels of suffering. There's the hungry ghosts, which is the anything from a sort of something that I want just now to a craving, the most powerful of our cravings. And then the human realm, which is, if you like, the best of what it is to be human. Again, we've gone through that before. And these six realms are all impermanent. They're held, if you remember, if you've seen a picture of the Wheel of Life, and if you haven't, please go and look at one, they're held by what Master Rinzai calls here that murderous demon of impermanence. That it's a terrifying creature that's sometimes painted red, sometimes black, with teeth, three eyes, claws, and it's often biting into the wheel because it's devouring, just as time devours and takes all things away. And it has a headdress made of 5 skulls. Those are the 5 skandhas, which is what goes together to make a human being, and the skulls represent again that mortality, that impermanence, that real sense of everything in change. And of course, although he appears fearsome and terrifying, he is of course just that principle of change, principle of impermanence. But if he happens to be taking away something of which I'm inordinately fond, then he looks a fearsome and ferocious demon. So we see that this demon of impermanence looks demonic, or looks frightening to us, because he just now happens to be taking away something that I like. If he's taking away something I don't like, he appears as an angelic force. And so we see also another useful point here, that actually a lot of our experiences are conditioned whether or not they suit me or they don't suit me. And so the demons that we are chased by are often of our own making. And this is what it points to. So these three worlds are simply another formulation of these worlds of impermanence, coming to be and ceasing to be, endlessly coming to be and ceasing to be, not because I want them to, and not because I don't want them to either. They're coming to be and ceasing to be because they are conditioned to do so. And the conditioning is, well, karma is certainly one of the conditioning forces, the one that's spoken of most of in Buddhism. These are, if you like, our moral habits or our ethical habits, our motivations for things, and depending on the type of actions that we perform, well, that our resulting experience can be pleasant or unpleasant, and there is a lot of subtlety there. Often the doctrine of karma is seen in a very sort of superficial, almost naive way, but actually it's incredibly subtle and very important in Buddhism too. Again, worth looking up if you're not familiar with it. So these three worlds of desire, this is that real wanting of something, not just, oh well, this would be pleasant, but that real wanting of something, and the world of form, which is our, if you like, is our physical world. These are the objects that we want, and then there's the formless world, which is the world of our mentality, our inner world, our world of mental objects. So there's the physical world, physical consciousness, there's mental consciousness, and then there's the desire that we have for the objects of both those worlds, of course. And all those worlds are impermanent, all those worlds are subject to this demon of impermanence, and being attached to any of those things, being dependent upon any of those things, as I am, inevitably leads to suffering, because sooner or later it's going to be taken away. And in a nutshell, this is really what Buddhism is about. This is what the Buddha taught in those Four Noble Truths. And saying that this house is on fire, well, this actually goes back to the fire sermon of the Buddha, because the Buddha also said the same thing. He said that this body is on fire with the three fires of greed, hatred, and delusion, and particularly in the delusion of selfhood, the delusion of an I. And the Buddha also said there is no dwelling in such a house. And that was a very famous sermon by the Buddha. And so Master Rinzai clearly here is alluding to that earlier sermon of the Buddha when he's saying exactly the same thing. And it's useful because Master Rinzai, a great Zen master, makes it quite clear that he's well acquainted with the Buddha's teachings. And of course he would be, because he spent many years of his life as a Buddhist monk in the Tendai tradition, where they go into the teachings a great deal. It's a good thing for us to do as well, to go into the teachings, because we're not always that familiar with them. And there's a great deal of subtlety and nuances to be found therein too. So this murderous demon of impermanence strikes in a single instant, without choosing between high and low, old and young. And it's true. It's not doesn't discriminate. It can strike at any time. And again, I remember Venerable Myokyoni saying that it's a useful thing to be able to, from time to time, to just contemplate our own mortality, because we very easily get caught up in our own individual day-to-day likes and dislikes, and I make a great hullabaloo out of them, and they become incredibly important, because when those fires flare up and they take hold of me, and they do take hold of me, then they blow everything out of perspective. And this is why it is said that all fires flaring are all tainted with that fire of delusion, because the delusion is not that we don't see anything, but that what we do see is lacks its usual perspective. It gets blown out of proportion. And this one tiny thing that becomes the whole of my world, and nothing else matters but this. And this is when we can get ourselves into a state where I really am prepared to cut my nose off to spite my face, so to speak. And there's a funny and rather moving, really, Grimm's fairy tale along that, about 3 housemates who lived together in a little cottage by the end of the wood. And one was a sparrow, another was a mouse, and the third was a sausage. And the 3 of them had lived together as housemates very happily for quite a long time. And as is the usual case, they had their own particular chores to do. And for the sausage, naturally, he was the cook. And the little mouse, he used to chop the wood and tend to the fire to make sure that that was always burning, so the meals could be cooked. And the sparrow, he used to take the bucket and fetch the water from the well, which was in the wood. And our story opens on a sort of cold, wintry day when it's really lashing down with rain. And the sparrow was about his usual business, taking the bucket to fill it up with water. And he had managed to huff and puff and get all the way through the sort of wind and the rain to the well. And he just stopped for a breather before putting the bucket down the well to get the water, when another sparrow appeared and said, "My goodness, what are you doing on this day when you should be inside?" "Oh," said the first sparrow, he said, "I've come to fetch the water. It's my job." He said, "What do you mean it's your job?" And the sparrow explained that the 3 of them lived together, the mouse and the sausage, and that they each had their own particular chores. Sausage cooked, the mouse looked after the wood and the fire, and the sparrow's job was to collect the water. And the second sparrow sort of tut-tutted and said, "My goodness," they said, "they must have really seen you coming. I mean, you really get the sort of the short straw, don't you? Having to come out on a filthy day like this, getting cold and wet, and my goodness, why you don't die of pneumonia. You easily could. Whilst those other 2, they stay nice and warm inside. I mean, even chopping a bit of wood just by the cottage doesn't take long, and then that mouse puts his feet up by the fire, and the sausage in the warmth of the kitchen. They must have seen you coming." And of course the first sparrow was first of all began to really defend his friends. No, you've made a mistake. No, not at all. But you know how it is. We all have a few resentments inside us. No matter what our circumstances, there's always a few seeds there, ready to be brought to the surface with some grumbling. And after a while, he began to think, well, maybe he's right, I do always have to go out in all weathers, and those 2 do manage to stay inside. It is, after all, a rather unequal in the sort of jobs that we do. And as he began to fly back with a bucket of water, this big thing began to go round and round in his mind, and more he felt the sort of indignation. Now it wasn't so much that it was, a rotten day, but they had planned this. They were doing this on purpose. How stupid he had been. He was not going to tolerate this anymore. And so when he got back, he immediately, with his face like thunder, called a house meeting, and the other 2 said, "What is it?" They could see he was visibly upset, and he had his say, his rant more like, saying, and our jobs must change. I will not put up with this any more." And the other two said to him, "No, please," they said, "please, don't. We are also well suited to our own particular jobs. And it's all, up to now, it's worked so well." And of course this merely confirmed to the Sparrow that those two had been taking up to something and taking him for a ride, and so he absolutely dug his heels in and refused to shift. And in the end, the other two, in order to keep the peace, acquiesced and said, "Okay, we will rotate our jobs." And so they came to a decision that now the sausage would go to the well, and the mouse would be the cook, and the sparrow would chop the wood and tend to the fire. And so the following day, they all set about their new jobs. And the sausage took the bucket and went to the well, and he got to the well and was just fixing the bucket onto the hook of the rope to put down the well, when, because of his hands are always greasy, being a sausage, the bucket slipped out of his hands and fell down the well. And the sausage thought, "Oh no." And so he tried to lean down because it wasn't too deep, and he thought he might just be able to reach it. And hanging rather precariously, almost able with the tips of his fingers to reach that bucket handle, when suddenly his other hand slipped, also with the grease, and he tumbled head first down to the bottom of the well and drowned. And meanwhile, back at the cottage, the mouse started cooking up the broth for lunch and stirring the cooking away, and within a short period of time the sparrow had chopped the wood, stoked up the fire, and was now sitting in the chair by it and putting his feet up. And after a while the mouse said to the sparrow, "You know, Sausage has been a long time. Do you think he's all right?" And Sparrow thought, "Yes, he's right. He has taken rather a long time. Maybe I should go and see him." And so Sparrow flew over to the well. And when he got there, to his horror, when he looked down the well, he could see his friend and flatmate and friend drowned. And he realized with bitter sorrow the trouble that he had caused, and he could see exactly how he had slipped, and what a fool now he had been. And with a heavy heart, and really bursting into tears, he began to make his way back to the house. Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, the mouse had cooked up the broth, and it was all ready. And now it just needed a little bit of flavouring, and he had always seen Sausage just dip his tail into the soup in order to add a little bit of flavour. And so Mouse thought he would do the same thing, and lifting himself up, he dipped his tail and rump end into the soup, and of course immediately scolded himself, and the shock caused him to let go, and he tumbled straight into the cauldron and unfortunately drowned, cooking to death. And when the sparrow came back, there was now a second dreadful, pitiful sight to be seen. The mouse floating face down in the soup. He really was in it. And the poor little sparrow sat himself down in the chair and wept and wept and wept until his heart broke, and he died of that broken heart. Well, there you go. That's a Grimm's fairy tale for you. However, there's a point there, or a couple of points there, as perhaps rather naive or childish that the story may seem. Actually, there is something in us that strikes a chord. I mean, how easily with those things we get carried away. And because those seeds of resentment, those seeds of not always having my own way, well, they get buried. And when they come up to the surface, they are often fairly highly charged, and they can be stirred up particularly by other people. I've seen it in my own life, in myself and in others too. When people start sort of complaining, very quickly something begins to bubble up inside us, and I want to join in. Because with my own woes, we can wind ourselves up into a real state of righteous indignation. And when people get together and do that en masse, then it can become very frightening indeed. And so having that sense of perspective on things, to realize that actually, and this is what Miyokyo used to say, she said, when we found ourselves in one of those states, or when I really found that I couldn't stand this or whatever, or was getting myself worked up, that it's a useful thing to just say, right, now, 5 minutes to live, that's all. 5 minutes, that's all. In 5 minutes, it's all over for me. I'm a goner. Would this problem still exist? Would this still be here? Would this still be so overbearing? There's very little that can really stand up to that demon of impermanence that strikes in a single instance. And this is why contemplation of one's own mortality, far from being a morbid thing, it can be morbid, but actually in a spiritual practice it's not morbid. It's there as a sort of sobering effect, almost like a slap in the face, really. It puts us back in our place, because what blows us out of proportion are those how it suits me or how it doesn't suit me. And then it gets fired up, and then it becomes I must have, or I cannot stand. And that becomes the whole of my world. And it's these things that we suffer from. Then Master Rinzai goes on. Do you wish to be not different from the Buddhas and patriarchs? Well, presumably we do wish that. That's why we're practicing the Buddha's way. Then, he says, just do not look for anything outside. And that do not look for anything outside. We may think that we know it. Particularly if we've been in the practice for a while, we may think that we know, well, yes, thinking that the answer lies in a new car, or in a new relationship, or in a new life, or something like that. It's not that there's anything wrong with these things, but to imagine that there's something that they are not, that they can bring something that actually they cannot bring, is only to store up suffering, because our expectations will be dashed sooner or later. Maintaining that realistic perspective on things, seeing that there is the joy in it, but there's also the warts and all side. And if we can take the whole, then that's fine. Those things, we will not suffer from them. We will partake in them, enjoying the good things, and holding ourselves together and steeling ourselves together for those things that are more difficult too. And in that round of life, then we're less likely to fall into that dukkha. Do not look for anything outside, but that looking for something outside can also refer to the future or to the past as well. Nowadays there's a great deal of interest in sort of looking back and a sort of nostalgic view. I remember when I was studying philosophy at university, I came across the sermons of Bishop Butler, who was, I think he was a 17th century bishop of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And he gave a sermon on the myth of the Golden Age. Now, you have to remember, this was the 17th century. He was saying that, he says, nowadays, he says, people think the world has gone to rack and ruin, he said. And the older people generally say that in the past, things were always much better. And he sort of likened this to the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, which always happened in the past. Eden's always in the past, a long time ago. And ever since then, the world's just gone to rack and ruin. And he was pointing out that this always seemed to be the case. We love to look back with a sort of fond nostalgia to the past, and often ignoring the fact that it had its own difficulties, and fears and so forth, just as much as the world today also has them too. And when we look to the future, the other tendency is to project our ideals and our utopias onto it. And to think that, yes, either collectively we are all going to onto a much better world, or individually, and this can manifest even in the desire for enlightenment, that at some future phase, I may be a Zen master, or I may be a Buddha, and these two are looking, both of these looking to the back as sort of fond yearning, as if we could recreate it. And I remember Joseph Campbell, the American mythologist, singing a song, give me that old-time religion, give me that old-time religion. Remember Aphrodite, she's beautiful and flighty, she looks gorgeous in a nightie, and she's good enough for me. This idea that we can go back to sort of, the old religions as they were in the modern way, because somehow we feel that they were better, perhaps, than what we have. And there is that movement. Well, that's also looking for something outside, because it's not here now. So whether it's in the past or whether it's in the future, it's not here now. And so that's still looking for something outside. And so what the Buddha actually teaches, and what Master Rinzai teaches when he says, just become a man who has nothing further to seek. And when he says, just do not look for anything outside, in other words, right here, right now, is fulfilled, and is the only place to be fulfilled, actually. Awakening cannot happen at any other time except now. The pure light of your heart at this instant is the Dharmakaya Buddha. Now, the Dharmakaya Buddha, Sambhogakaya Buddha, and Nirmanakaya Buddha. This is what's known as the Trikaya, or the three bodies of the Buddha. And you can look this up also. It's a well-known teaching, particularly in the Yogacara Buddhist school, which is Yogacara teaching very much influenced Zen, both with the three bodies of the Buddha and the 8 consciousnesses of the Yogacara. But here we have the three bodies of the Buddha, and this was the recognition that, because in the beginning, Buddha, which is a title meaning the one who is awake, referred to Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived 2,500 years ago. But over time he became a more sort of transcendent force. The Dharmakaya Buddha actually represented what was known as the true body of the Buddha. We know it by the term Buddha nature, and also the true face in Zen too. And this is the mysterious body of the Buddha. It's the unknowable body of the Buddha. It's the body of the Buddha that is wholly other and unknowable, a complete mystery, and yet its presence is felt. And certainly it has an effect. Without it, there would be no phenomena at all. And this Dharmakaya Buddha, he says, this pure light of your heart, and that pure light refers really just to the light of consciousness itself, the fact of consciousness. That the Dharmakaya Buddha is the one that sees, hears, touches, tastes, and smells, and is cognizant and knows these things, knows that the crow just cawed outside the window, that knows that the dog has just barked, and knows that it's hot or cold, or that the surface is hard or soft, and so on. That's that pure consciousness. That is the true body of the Buddha, the one who is awake, the one who sees things as they really are. Not the one who sees things in a distorted way, in a distorted perspective. That is I. But the one who sees things as they really are. And often things can bubble up inside. Sometimes we are intent on a particular course of action, and yet there's something inside us that isn't quite comfortable about it. Stop. Listen. What is it that's not comfortable right now in what is to be done, when I am getting very shrill about doing something and carried away with it? The non-differentiating light of your heart at this instant is the Sambhogakaya Buddha. This is the body of the Buddha that sees, hears, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling. It's actually the consciousness, but differentiated into the sense basis. And then the non-discriminating light of your own heart at this instance is the Nirmanakaya Buddha in your own house. These are the transformation bodies of the Buddha. In other words, they are the objects of consciousness. Now, we shouldn't imagine that these three bodies are three separate things. They're not. They're all a continuum. But they're just, if you like, three different ways of seeing exactly the same mountain. In other words, what Master Rinzai is really pointing to, and this is the other side of not looking for anything outside, is that instead of wishing ourselves to be something different than we are, actually look and see what right now is functioning. That in the hearing, what is it that hears? And just now when the heart moves and suddenly becomes aware of thinking or something like that, what is it that is actually doing all these things? What is it that is just, even when we go into the states on the wheel, such as a hungry ghost or a fighting demon, what is it that becomes those things? To really stay with that, keep asking that question, what is there? What is there right now? This trinity of the Buddha's body is none other than he here before your eyes, listening to my expounding of the Dharma. You can come to this seeing only by not running and searching outside. So, with that, by that not running and searching outside, don't allow the thoughts to carry me away. Just keep at home, firmly at home, in what at this moment is being done, with that being given in to what at this moment is being done, and see that changing nature. But what is it that is undergoing all those transformations? Actually, what is undergoing those transformations, that doesn't change. Okay, we'll leave it there.